James, this was a very cool week. We had Jessica Yellin, former CNN Chief White House Correspondent. She's interviewed world leaders like Bill Clinton, George Bush, Barack Obama. And again, somehow we got to interview her.
Yeah, it was awesome. And what she's doing now with building like a new type of media company, I think is fascinating.
And come on, why don't you tell everyone why you're actually so excited about this one?
No, the content is incredible, but there was a part of me when I was younger who wanted to be a politician. I did used to wear American flag ties and lapel pins to weddings, and I majored in poli-sci. So unlike what I've talked about previously, where I think 16-year-old James would be disappointed that he's running an ad tech podcast on the side, I think he'd be pretty pumped that he just got to interview Jessica Yellin.
Well, then let's just get into it with Jessica, where she tells us all about political ads, how she's ushering in a new era of news, and a ton of other stuff. This week's episode of Taking Inventory is brought to you by one of our sponsors, Meet Market, your AI assistant for e-commerce marketing. Market isn't just another growth tool, it's a member of your team, helping you keep a pulse on your business and trained to save you time and make you money. It's also co-founded by James Barrow and myself. Visit us at withmarket.com. Now, let's get to the podcast. Jessica Yellin is the founder of News Not Noise, which brings news to people in new and engaging ways. She breaks down complicated issues, interviews experts, and answers questions with facts and context, all from your phone. Prior to that, Jessica was the Chief White House Correspondent for CNN, where she interviewed the likes of President Obama, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, First Lady Michelle Obama, and so many more. Jessica's a Peabody, Gracie, and Emmy award-winning political journalist, and also the author of Savage News, which was published in 2019. So Jessica, you're very busy, so we appreciate you joining us today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for introducing me to your work. I've been listening to the podcast, and I'm learning all kinds of new things. Like now I know to say that everything is an ad network. I'm not sure exactly what it means, but I'm feeling into it.
It was a quote by Eric Seufert, and it basically means at this point there's just going to be ads everywhere.
Right.
But yeah, thank you for doing this. And like Daniel said, I know you have a ton going on, so we appreciate you making the time. And I think maybe a good place to start is just, Daniel gave a little bit of a background on it, but we'd love to just sort of know more about News Not Noise and kind of what led you to start it, and just kind of like that founder story of how you got there.
Sure. So News Not Noise is a digital-first media brand that provides trusted news and information that respects your mental health. I like to say we bring you facts, not panic attacks. And I'll explain why. I do it. I launched on Instagram, and that's where my biggest audience is. But now we're across platforms, and we have an audience of about 1 million across platforms, and a much bigger punch because our followers are very high profile. We have lots of like Jennifer Aniston's and Selena Gomez's who repost our stuff, and the media follows. And so it started becoming a bit of a conversation piece.
When you were thinking about even starting News Not Noise, what was that aha moment? Because you had done so much on TV and now transitioning to this.
So yeah, and you asked for the founder story. So I had gotten into the news because I thought, oh, well, here's a way to do well and do good. I grew up in a super engaged family, and I wanted to help voters get informed, right? And so naive little me went into the news thinking, oh, my job will be to get people informed. And then fast forward, I find myself as the Chief White House Correspondent at CNN in the Obama years. I've covered national elections, international, crises, et cetera. And I'm constantly at that time covering campaigns out in the field interviewing undecided voters, because like when you're a political correspondent, what do you spend your time doing? Talking to the swing voters. And overwhelmingly, they were women, and overwhelmingly, they would yell at me and say, and they didn't mean me personally only, but like you all in cable news are constantly screaming and making me hysterical and panicked about everything, but you're not giving me the information I need. And they'd pull out their phone and point and say, is this person going to raise my taxes? Is this person going to change my health care? They're like, I'm not getting information. I'm just getting scared. So I'd go back to home base and pitch like, hey, I think there's an audience that wants us to do some of this differently. Can I innovate and try some stuff? And I was not given that opportunity and told things. And I eventually, for a lot of reasons, grew frustrated and left and decided I believe in that thesis. And I want to see if I can figure out how to reach an audience with information told differently. And this was back in 2018, basically the second year of the Trump administration. Nobody was doing 3-minute explainer videos breaking down the news in a casual way like they are now. And I really was the first credentialed journalist to start doing that. And I just picked up my phone. I didn't know what else to do. Like, I didn't know, was there a way to do this? Is this a thing? And I just started from my couch at home explaining what was going on in the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. And long story short, I got an audience. It exploded. Jessica Seinfeld found the account. She reposted it. Amy Schumer found it because of Jessica. Amy Schumer announced her pregnancy on my Instagram, and it became a global news story, and the rest is sort of history.
It's incredible. Is it kind of surreal, like in that moment where like you became the news, kind of like?
Oh my God. It was, first of all, you're always looking, you're doing this at like, oh, look, I got 10 new followers. And then Amy Schumer announces, and it's like 10,000 in a minute, 10,000 in another minute. And all of a sudden it just explodes. And then I had a real sense of like responsibility, right? And reintroducing it, figuring all that out. But yes, now it was like on CNN.com and BBC.com and all over the place. And people still reference me as like, Amy Schumer's friend, which is, we're Insta friends, which is cool. She's been a huge supporter.
And as News.Noise has started to scale, like, have you found it hard to like kind of stay within like that ethos? And I guess maybe even the question more is there a reason why when these things get to scale like CNN, it like becomes, the incentives like become bad almost?
I still love how real you are. The news, like any industry that's kind of like stuck in its ways, developed a conventional wisdom, which is that the only way to get your attention is through conflict, rage, and panic. And so every story is, almost every story, right, is formed around how do we maximize the conflict? How do we trigger your like reptilian brain to freak out so that you'll stay tuned in? And that is increasingly, leans into polarization. It leans into conflict. It means you're going to find two guests who will fight instead of two guests who will agree on some things and then define their differences. And yet that worked in an era when people were sitting on the couch channel surfing, right? And you needed the loudest voice to get them to stop and pay attention. And it also might work with some algorithms, but it leaves people like desperate for something else. And so I think what's happened is when places start to scale, they go into like old habits of what's worked before. And that's the lazy default. And that's what makes it, quote, bad, I think, because it's only like scream. Like, do you actually enjoy listening to two people screaming at each other about talking points?
No,
okay.
No, not at all.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and what I've started to do and what I think takes off on social, and you see it on social, is more like information, more stories that have solutions, different kinds of storytelling. It builds community, it builds deep engagement. It's where we're headed. It's just we're in this weird transition phase. And so we notice the bad stuff because it's big and loud.
And was there a learning curve for you, or how did you even approach developing content for mobile and for, you're breaking down complex topics or interviewing, heads of state, as you said, but you're doing it on a format that typically people are, constantly just scrolling.
So there's two things. One is I just talk to you like a person, and I figured out, now that I have an audience, I figured out what they want, how to talk to them. I mean, it's a real community where I ask them questions and I get tons of responses, and I share what they care about. So I hear from the audience a lot. But the other piece of it is, like, I figured out people don't just want, right now, they don't even want that much politics. They care a lot about health. They care a lot about climate, education, stuff in culture. And it's really just figuring out where people's pain points are, what their decision anxiety is around, and unpacking it in a way that feels gettable and safe. And I figured that out just through like trying stuff and failing and then seeing what worked. I literally, like, at once upon a time, I was on the north lawn of the White House, doing interviews with, as you say, world leaders, with cameramen around me and sound people and lights and all that. And then cut to, I'm on my couch at home with the camera and my phone as my camera, and it's just me. So you quickly learn what works. And even though I started focusing on politics, I did a ton during COVID. And more often than not, when people come up to me, they'll say, "You got me through COVID more than you even got me through Trump." And so what I realized is like the strategy I'm using works for any category of information, health, home. It's just about relating to people, explaining the jargon, staying calm, and buttoning the story in a way that, like, I really mean respects their mental health, doesn't trigger anxiety. And they are so grateful for that. People just come back.
And for you, like now that you don't have writers or someone in your ear, I assume that's how that works. Like, but the do you find that like there is just this responsibility of like, okay, like let's really make sure that like we don't set off kind of like a bit of a panic? Like, is it hard to?
Yes. I mean, first of all, I'm trained in cable news, right? So the minute something happens, I'm like, oh my God, oh my God. I still have like this weird adrenaline response. And then I have to talk myself down. Like, no, that's not what we need. Other places will like jump on the story. And I do have people who help me now who write and report and gather info. But it's just a different approach. Like I do this thing on Fridays called News That Doesn't Suck. And it's not happy news. It's not like mom and child reunited, because plenty of people are doing that. It's substantive news that is not bad, like breakthroughs in climate progress or new medical discoveries or space, reminders of progress. And here's a big thing, that people work together. Here's an example of collaboration leading to success. That is such a helpful balance to the kind of nonstop barrage of toxic, negative information the news often feeds people. And I'm trying to show there's a way to bring that into the mix without seeming shallow or silly. So it's really about figuring out the balance. And tastes are changing right now. Nobody really wants to hear a lot of depth about what's going on in Congress. But I think, they're going to care about politics this time next year.
And have you seen, do tastes change? Like, is that like a constant thing where it's like you can like sense it?
Yeah, well, for one thing, because I do what I do, because I have such an engaged community, I hear things from the audience before the signal reaches a lot of other reporters or medias. So, for example, in the 20 election cycle, people would message me asking, "Why aren't you reporting on all the sex trafficking?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And I was getting all these messages about sex trafficking going on and not getting reported well before anybody was talking about QAnon. And so I saw the QAnon messaging moving through social threads before it exploded into the public eye. And so because I'm in this dialogue, I often do see these trends. And right now, the trend is just deep skepticism, mistrust of all media and institutions, and people asking me constantly, like, is this true? Even if it's not my area of expertise, they're like, I trust you, so you tell me, is this true? It's a worrying trend, but at least they're asking.
And because you've developed this community, I mean, do you feel some sense of responsibility to, I guess, present news and interviews that cater to your audience that follows you or the community, or do you try to take a totally general point of view and some they'll like, some they won't? Like, how do you approach catering to the audience?
That's a really good question, because, there's a couple dimensions to that. One is catering. There's the newsletter. There's different platforms have different, tastes. And there's also catering to the algorithm. And, if you're on social, the things that do the best with the algorithm are often noisy or combative. And so sort of finding where the overlap is. And I do a little bit of all of the above. So I sometimes do a primer, so I know a story is going to be coming up and big. And so I'll start explaining little bits of it now without really going deep, so that people have the language when it hits. I find that's a big part of confusion for folks, is they just don't know the jargon. Like, for all of you, I think a lot of, like, I've messaged you, James, since I've been listening to your podcast asking, what does this term mean? What does that term mean? And that's news not noising it for me. sometimes it's just the lingo that locks people out. And if you just define your terms, it empowers people with knowledge so they can participate in the conversation. And that's my main goal. Like, I'll back up and say my audience is overwhelmingly women ages 25 to 44, college educated. A lot of them aren't getting news elsewhere, but they want to know. And I help them sort of get onboarded to feeling confident enough to engage.
Interesting. And given, I mean, that demographic, I feel like also is, correct me if I'm wrong, like ends up being kind of like the one that decides elections.
Yes,
Right.
yeah.
Uh,
And shopping
then-
decisions. Yeah.
yeah. And then you mentioned just sort of like having to kind of placate to the algorithms. Is that something you feel like tangible? Like is like,
Oh my God.
it's a party in it has a role in everyday kind of life that you have to deal with.
Yes. I mean, James, this is one of the reasons, and I'll just say I reached out to you to ask about other models and what's, because there is such a constraining factor. The algorithms, in order to reach an audience in social, you have to do certain tricks. And I think there's an appetite for other kinds, for information that doesn't do those things. And sort of where is the space to do that? So yeah, if I put up like some outrageous thing from Trump or somebody screaming about Trump, what happens is everybody will start responding. And even if they're angry and enraged, all those responses tell the algorithm there's engagement. And so it does better. But what I've just done is left somebody feeling pissed off, alienated, not informed. And that is not helpful for their day. And I don't just mean like it's bad for democracy. We all know if you leave somebody feeling bad, they don't like your brand, right? So people might tune into the news, but then they're angry at the news because it leaves them feeling terrible. So how do we find a way to provide information that doesn't leave you feeling like you need to open your wrists and bleed out? And I'm sorry. And
Yeah.
and yet is like a community and reaches an audience. And so there's such a hunger for this. I'm certain this is our next thing, right? It's like bringing together a lot of creators, bringing together some consolidation, but the platforms are, I mean, they're toxic in the ways that news can be toxic too, and you have to cater to it to some extent. Yes.
It's such a tangible example of like how people have to deal with AI every day
Yeah.
and how they don't quite understand it. And it is a little scary because like it's probably one of like many different touch points we'll have over time where it is this like random thing that is getting between you and the people you're trying to get to. And so I do think what you're doing of like trying to find some way of like, how do we get around this and sort of self-identify as not panicked people has like just so much value and need.
And it's also not like fake. There's a not fake component. I mean, I think one of the things that's exhausting people from the platforms is you don't know where they're paid or what they're coming from or why they're pushing the thing. And I don't know. There's just a lot. I'm just seeing increasingly people saying to me, hey, can we get this not on Instagram or can we get this not on TikTok, whatever. Like there's a desire to get off among a lot of people.
A quick break from one of our sponsors. Meet Market, your AI assistant for e-commerce marketing. Market isn't just another growth tool. It's a member of your team, helping you keep a pulse on your business and trained to save you time and make you money. It's also co-founded by James Barrow and myself. Visit us at withmarket.com. Now back to the podcast. It's also really interesting hearing you talk about, not scraping for impressions and likes and comments, because, I mean, coming from cable, that was always how ads were sold. We have the most impressions in primetime and late night. And then on these algorithms, they prioritize impressions, likes, comments, engagements. But you're really trying to get a hyper engaged audience in the right way. That also, we are, as we open the conversation, everything is an ad network.
Yeah.
And so there is that component too. You have a hybrid model where you're reader supported, but you're also ad supported. And so how does that play into your decision of, I don't need to get the most impressions. I want quality impressions and quality engagements, but balancing that with the other two?
The value prop is that I am a safe space to engage in the conversation uh, with an audience that has total trust. And we are in an era, as we're all saying, like of revolution, innovation, rapid change in the media. The old model was get mass market on TV. And advertisers, to my great dismay, are still stuck in thinking that, spending huge dollars on TV is the way to reach an audience that's hyper engaged. The thing is, we have the models are changing so rapidly, and the audience that, for example, I have and creators like me have is a difference in that they have total complete trust. So I gave you an example a few minutes ago. Somebody said to me, I can't sell my house in this market and I need to invest, so should I spend money renovating my kitchen, and how much should I spend? And I was like, this isn't my area of expertise. And she said, but I trust you, and I know you know how to get the right people. And so that, I think, the credible messenger is an undervalued entity right now. And I think of all these advertisers who say, oh, I'm scared of politics or I'm scared of news. And so they don't want to engage with news brands. But then they advertise on Twitter and their brand is up against a white supremacist or an anti Semite or some crazy thing that somebody's posted there. And so you're never getting away from it. It's the choice now, and I think the direction people have to move into is making conscious decisions about which sort of messengers to align with, because that's where the audience is truly deeply engaged. We all know these platforms are making these numbers about impressions and views, and I don't know, you can tell me, is 3 seconds of view, is 8 seconds of view? But if I have college educated women who are watching me for 3 minutes or reading my newsletter for 15, that's a real thing. And so one of the things that I'm mystified by is why advertisers still think like, oh, TV's huge when you have this passive audience, or Twitter's safe, but like, I'm scared of news. I don't know. Can you explain that?
No, I can't explain it. But I know, yeah, I think what the big things are, I don't think there's there hasn't been a good way to measure impact.
Right.
And like what you do is like provide impact. And that is like not been solved yet because it's like hard.
Interesting.
Right. And so I think that's probably one reason. And then I do think it was until recently, I do think like a sort of demographic issue in where like the media buyers watch TV, and so they were buying TV. Like we saw that when we were at Snapchat, which was like, someone would be, I'm 39, they'd be like my age. It would be like, hey, like you guys should be advertising on Snapchat. And like my friends don't use Snapchat. And it's like,
right.
It doesn't matter. Like,
right.
What are you talking about? Like it's totally irrelevant. So I think there's like some of that, but I do think for what you're doing, and we talked about this previously, like the brands are missing out on like such an opportunity to like be part of the conversation and to kind of like put a little bit of stake in the ground and be like, I actually do believe in sort of some semblance of like sanity and like discourse and community.
Yeah.
And, I was just kind of curious from back like in the CNN days, like how did brands even determine like how they wanted to be part of these stories, like adjacent at all? Or is it purely like the way that world works is like CNN has a lot of viewers, therefore P&G wants to be there?
Well, for those worlds, it was a lot of who your audience is. One of the big sells for cable is they're reaching members of Congress, people who are like also buyers. It's almost more a B2B play in a way. And there is a big difference in how you advertise to sort of political insiders and the donor class versus to gettable voters. They're very different. And, donor class and all those folks, they really like partisan messaging, hard-hitting stuff, the kinds of things you see on Twitter that explode, like snarky ads, black and white scare things that seem like very gotcha. It's more preaching to the converted. It's more like my team is right, rah, rah, rah. And it signals to the insiders, yeah, we're out there in the fight. But that's not what wins over undecided voters. That just sounds like negative partisanship to them. undecided voters, you need to find an emotional connection and you need to engage over and over and over. It's not a single touch point, it's a repetition, like game, and finding different ways. What are the issues they care about? How do you connect with them on those issues? How do you surround sound them so that the people they're following are talking about this issue too? Um, I've gone a little further than what you asked, but political advertising has changed dramatically from the days they would just advertise on cable.
And I think we want to get into a little deeper on especially entering an election cycle, like the political advertising campaigns. But even before that, I'm curious how you actually work with advertisers then, because you've seen the cable model and it's broken to some extent. How do you then work with brands, select brands, and integrate them in what you're doing?
Thank you for the question. So what I do is I look for sort of values aligned brands. One of the things I say is my community isn't like-minded because some are center right, some are center left. They are like valued. They care about their pocketbook, their kids, they're making informed choices, and they care about their impact on the world. So it's brands that share that ethos and want to get real information out, right? So it's real, not fake. I say experts, not influencers, facts and not panic. What I'm really good at is breaking down complicated information and making it feel digestible and shareable and non panicking. And so, anybody who wants that, I work in a bespoke way with them to help get that content produced for their channels and ours, and then drive to whatever it is they want an audience going to.
It's really interesting too, because like in a lot of ways, like in the context of like us, like at Snapchat, you are like both a publisher and also like a creative strategist.
Yes.
Like you're like, which is like that skill set of trying to figure out like how do you communicate these complicated topics, even from a brand perspective, I think it's just so unique right now in this marketplace. And Daniel and I have talked about this even for our own startup, where we're like, how do we possibly explain this stuff to people in like a coherent way? I think there's definitely a need. Do you get the sense, I guess, would you let like a political a campaign like advertise? Like where are the boundaries between like that and...
I haven't crossed that Rubicon. I I think that there's a big difference between an issue ad and a specific candidate. And so I would be open to issues because I'm clear on certain issues. You know, we like my audience wants gun safety, so that's something I would allow, right? Um, but I don't think a negative partisan attack. I would not do a negative partisan attack ad.
The political ads are just so interesting to us because obviously it's such a divisive issue, but every couple of years we see ad spending skyrocket, and Google and Meta and every ad platform scrambles to get some of those dollars because it can make or break quarters. And I don't think a lot of people understand maybe what goes into that or the thought process. All they see are these, this barrage of ads for a period of time, and then it goes quiet for a year or two. And so because you've seen it now on the cable side, on the digital side, and you're so experienced in it, what are some of the things that maybe regular people don't understand about the political campaign process and the advertising process as it relates to like elections and things?
So many things. First, how not coordinated the landscape is, and then how coordinated certain pockets of it are. So let me explain what I mean. When you see an ad for a specific candidate and it says this ad has been supported by candidate so and so, that's an ad from that elected official who's running for office. Now, you might see 17 other ads championing that person or attacking that person. Those other ads likely have no connection to that candidate or to the candidate's opponents. In other words, they're done by outside spending groups. Overwhelmingly, the messages you're seeing are by these outside spending groups that want to drop into elections and support an issue or a cause or a candidate. But they have their own strategy and their own reasoning. So there's like a flood of money going in for all sorts of different reasons. And some of those ads by these outside groups are actually organized by like certain entities that have multiple groups. And those multiple groups are coming at these issues from different angles. And as reporters, it's very hard to find out who is behind the spend and, where these groups really are getting their money. That's what we call like dark money. It means money that's moving into the political system when we can't have a hard time tracing back where it's coming from. So part of the reason people will say, don't they know it pisses me off to see so many negative ads? The candidate should just stop running these. Most of them aren't from the candidate. That's what's going on. And then I think one of the things you're going to see this cycle that's going to be very different is ads in all sorts of different, like, creators making content, things that look more native, like memes on social, that might actually be coming from some of these outfits for political purposes. You just can't tell.
Crazy. And so do you think they're getting to the point where like that they've sort of caught up, like there's a level of sophistication where like, I mean, meme marketing is like pretty clever if you could pull that off and like kind of especially like play to the algorithms. Like, is this one of the first times where there's going to be that like that level of manipulation?
I think you saw it in 20, and you'll see it in an even bigger level, greater scale next year. I mean, the right is great at political memes. I get yelled at by my audience all the time because I follow some very, extreme accounts because it's my job to see what's going on. And some of these extremists do really funny content, in between they're really upsetting, offensive content. And you wouldn't know if you didn't already understand where this person's coming from. But I do think you'll see an explosion of that. I think you'll see, content coming from who knows, foreign sources, dark money sources, everything. It's just going to be, it's going to be very dense and busy. And as I like to say, it'll be very noisy at the end of this campaign.
And one thing that I think opened our eyes up to also is just like, there's a concept of in like the ad tech world of brand safe, which is like when we were at Snapchat, like the number of big brands that would yell at us when their ad was like somewhat adjacent to some negative content was like, it was like every week. It was like constant whack-a-mole that we had to deal with. Yeah, it was a nightmare. And we tried really hard to avoid it, but it's just hard to avoid it in these situations. And, you think about just like, I think to your point, and I think what you're building makes so much sense. Like Twitter, Instagram, I mean, whether you like it or not, these are like really brand unsafe environments. Mm-hmm. Like those meme accounts that are like, have millions of followers. Like I've seen some of those. Like that stuff is pretty dark. Mm-hmm. And brands today, I think like maybe they just haven't opened their eyes up to it. Have you found that like in conversations with brands to advertise with you that they are aware that like there are tons of touch points right now that they are involved in that are like potentially not safe for them? Or do you think you're educating them on that still?
It's a weird combination. It's a good question where they're aware of it, but then they feel stuck in the system and don't know how to sell another way. And so it's a process of both education and reaffirming what they know, because it's just like, muscle memory. They've been doing that, so they keep doing it. And they assume there's a certain amount of pain associated with it. And so what I have to explain, well, when I find those conversations, what I explain is, it's a deeper kind of connection, and there is a safe way to relate to an audience where you're assured that that's not going to happen. I personally, and we've talked about this, think there's a huge opportunity in, creating scale around the sort of safer spaces and where to do that and how to do that. And I think that's the area we're moving into.
I saw one today too and we were texting with a friend at a big ad platform about this morning, which is there's now all these AI ads. So like there was one today where a fake Mr. Beast was selling some product, and it looked like, I mean, you really wouldn't know.
Wow.
And I think to your point, like I guess like if right now it's Mr. Beast and selling, hats and shoes, like what's going to
Yeah.
happen when like this election comes down to,
And I'll tell you two things about that. So I told you I get these signals before they really break out to the mains. One of the signals I'm getting a lot right now is this theme of mistrust. I don't believe. And people are saying, like, it's almost a sign of one's own intelligence and savvy in the eyes of the audience to reflexively disbelieve what they're seeing. And so I'll constantly get people sending me legitimate news stories or legitimate ads or whatever saying this is a lie, this is a conspiracy, right? And I'll have to say it's not. Here's what we know about it. What makes you think that? And they're like, oh, okay. Well, if you say so, I trust you. But I think we've taught people so conclusively that there's disinformation, people are spinning you, Russia's out there, that they are primed to reject. And there's so much skepticism, they don't know how to move into belief and discernment. And they need an endorser to get there. And so I think that's going to sort of like max out. We're going to get an epidemic of disbelief and skepticism through the 24 cycle. And what's going to be valuable after that are like places where they can trust, where I know what I'm getting is real. And I don't know necessarily like what forms that'll take. I have ideas, but that is the hunger right now. And I think to some extent it'll be like left right, but I don't think that'll be the only dividing line. It'll be around community, what you care about, and who you trust.
Hearing you say that too, there has been this trend of people like you that are starting to build communities, very trusted, safe spaces. Um, we won't name all of them, but a number of different reporters have newsletters or
Yeah.
Instagram accounts doing different types of news. So you see that just continuing to develop, and people starting to kind of find their niche communities, and maybe they follow you and two others, and you guys are their trusted sources. Is that how you see that playing out?
I think that there's going to be consolidation and or teaming up, and I think that people are going to follow the person they trust rather than the brand they trust in the information space increasingly. So, I mean, people will say to me, I don't believe a thing until I see you report it." And I tell them that's not a good strategy because I can't cover
Yeah.
everything. But
Yeah.
I hear that from a lot. I talk to a lot of other people who do what I do, and they get that too. So yes, I think like Substack has proven that there's a huge market for trusted voices in that way. I think there's a need for some curation and and discovery, like ease of discovery. If I trust you, who else do you recommend I trust? So I don't know. I mean, we do see these trends. So the social platforms are these mass plays. There's going to be a push into some sort of community plays of like valued people who have the trust of a similar audience working together.
Where does that then leave the mass media? So cable news, newspapers, the traditional sources.
I mean, I think that we're seeing this trend to consolidation where you will have these mega players that will be, the behemoths, and they will endure. But there'll be fewer of them. And so already we're seeing that, a lot of news outlets are folding. I think it's a tragedy and it's an urgent concern, and we need to find new ways to support that. I also, I just think we're moving into a landscape where you have, the CNNs and the New York Timeses and these highly profitable entities that have solved whatever their revenue issues are, they have largely solved for revenue in this moment through providing many streams of revenue, right? And then you'll see the creator economy, sort of smaller players as well. And I don't know how all this shakes out because you got the little fish and you got the mega fish. And like our society and our income gap, you need the middle too. So, what will we collectively do to grow the middle? And yeah, it's one of the challenges for democracy, to be honest, but it's a good moment to be doing what I'm doing.
And as you're mentioning that, I was thinking about kind of like some of these like citizen journalists that you've seen, like some of them, some good, some bad. Do you think that is that going to be part of the future, or do those people kind of become more like professionalized as these organizations kind of, consolidate over time?
I think that there will be a dividing line where some people will want to follow the citizen journalists, and then there'll be an appetite for people who, and by citizen journalists, I mean folks who don't necessarily check their facts or go, a lot of that stuff is sort of haphazard or not as rigorous, I should say.
Clickbait,
Let
right?
me put it that way. There will be an audience who wants report like information that comes from people who present it with, sort of a rigorous process and are transparent about their process and explain like, here's how I source things, here's how I know things, believe me or don't, but this is how we get here. And then there'll be sort of creators who tell you their opinion and tell you what's out there, and they will also have an audience. I just think those are different things. And the citizen journalists can merge into the rigorous version. You don't need to work in a newsroom to have rigor. But I do think that there's a difference between those kinds of presentations. And even if people don't consciously know it, they get it. Because I hear it from people. They'll say to me, like, I just know you know your stuff and you check it. I don't know how you do that, but you check it. When you tell me a thing, I believe it. And so I think as I'm saying, as skepticism rises, folks who are slightly revealing about how they get to a conclusion are the ones who are going to be sought out.
Yeah. And you mentioned this earlier, I think, about just like a need for almost accreditation. Like, and I guess, is that what the news was originally? It was like at some point, 100 years ago, there were reporters, or whatever, 150 years ago, people were reporting, and then finally it was like, okay, we should have an organization that accredits these people and make sure that they're telling factual news. Are we kind of back to that phase?
Well, I mean, I guess it was more top down, I think. But what news organizations offered was extreme curation. Like, we decide what counts as news, we decide how we're determining real facts, and then who will share it. And I think that the internet broke us from that. It's sort of like the old studio system in Hollywood where all these celebrities like could only do films for that one studio. Now there's opportunities to reach an audience in a million places, but everything goes to excess. And now we're drowning in too much information. We don't know if things are coming from AI or bots or, paid influencers who have a reason to tell us something. And I think that the response to this is going to be people craving, again, trusted curation, but in these new spaces on mobile from creators they trust, and in environments where they're already spending their time.
Bringing it back to kind of you and your company, what's on the horizon for you? What are you most excited about?
I'm excited about a lot of the themes I'm talking about, which is the opportunity to create sort of grow community through partnerships and through other, relationships with other trusted creators. The opportunity to use what I've sort of the code I've cracked in categories beyond just, news and health. It's weird. Like, I'm getting people asking me all questions about, I know this sounds insane, but, products and sort of lifestyle choices. I have this dog everyone's obsessed with, Bruno, and people want to buy the toys he's chewing. So I'm leaning into some of that, but I also think it's a big election year. And so it's a time to really be discerning about how to communicate, when to bring news to people, and really strategize around how to share sometimes very difficult and high emotion news and information in ways that keep people calm. Like, I'll just say this because you reach so many folks who do ads. My dream is to partner with an app or a platform that works on mental health, whether it's like a meditation play or just straight up mental health, because I believe that part of our mental health crisis is people's anxiety around the news. And I want to crack the code of providing information in ways that are grounded and healthy and support your well-being. And I think we can do that, and it would be huge.
Well, if anyone's listening, either founder or operating at a company, mental health, I mean, This is a perfect way to close out, I guess. Where can they get in touch with you, and where can other people learn more about News Not Noise and everything you're doing?
Great. So the place to check out what I do every day is on Instagram. Go in stories. I put up stories on stuff all the time. We have conversations. Check out my newsletter, which is on Substack, News Not Noise. Oh, I should say on Instagram, find me at Jessica Yellin. Jessica Yellin. My Substack's called News Not Noise. And they can also email me. You can email me at admin@newsnotnoise.com and we'll get back to you promptly. And this has been an absolute joy. I'm so impressed with the two of you. You do a great interview. Thank you for having me and teaching me.
Thank you so much.
I've ever heard anyone say. So thank you. We really appreciate your
That's
time.
not true. I don't believe it. Okay.
Before you go, we need your help. If you enjoyed this week's episode of Taking Inventory, then subscribe or rate wherever you listen to the podcast. And while you're at it, please share this episode or your favorite episode with a friend. We'll be back next week with another episode of Taking Inventory. See you then.